So if we could start with your full name, please.
Dale Wesley Christison.
And can you spell that for me, please?
Christison.
Great.
It's Scottish.
Very good. Now, where and when were you born?
I was born in a little town called Walcott, Iowa, which is about 15 miles from the Mississippi River. And it was known because it had 4 bars and no churches in town at that time. That was its claim to fame.
And what is your birth date?
My birthday, June 7, 1924.
So how old does that make you currently?
93.
And which branch of the military did you serve with?
In Navy, and at that time, it was Navy Air Corps, really, or Navy Air Force, as they called it. But I was an enlisted personnel.
And which years did you serve?
1942 to 1946.
And which theater did you serve in? Which theater did you serve in?
In South Pacific.
And what was your job with the Navy?
I was an aviation ordnanceman, and we dealt with all bombs. We loaded the bombs in the planes, and we repaired machine guns in the wings of fighter planes and loaded ammunition in them. And then out in the islands, we had to build our own ammunition. So we spent a lot of time over the years building ammunition. We ran out of ammunition because it all got mold on it, and it wouldn't run through the machine guns. So we had to, at one time at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, we carried probably 15 shiploads, LST shiploads of ammunition that had molded and gotten green mold on it, and dumped it out into the water out in the Pacific. And then later on, the ammunition was belted in little clips, and it would be in long strips so that it ran through the machine guns. And those things then, they must have found a new metal or a new fiber or something, and finally we got them so we were able to make them work properly in the machine guns. And that was a pretty big deal for over about a year and a half. We had a few fighter pilots come back and really make a lot of noise because our machine guns they'd fire them and they didn't fire, which, to a fighter pilot, that's not too good.
Now, what rank did you attain?
Aviation ordnanceman first class, and that's what that symbol is.
Great. Now, did you receive any medals or commendations for your service?
I didn't think we did, but it says on the back of my discharge that we received a Victory Medal, Asiatic and Pacific Theater, 3 stars, an American Area Medal, and the kids all holler about this. I got a Good Conduct Medal, and nobody would believe that. But that's how they have that on the back there. You'll probably, if you need to take a picture of that.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about your childhood, growing up during the Great Depression. Can you tell me who your parents were?
Roy and Nellie Christison, and we lived in. I was born in Walcott, Iowa, but then my dad was a railroad man, and as such, he was not able to get into World War One, and was too old in World War Two. But we lived in a railroad town, railroad farm community, really, and as we were growing up, we had a typical small town education, I'd say. And I played football and basketball and was a poor track man. And we had, that was the whole basis of the boys. I don't know what the girls did, but that was the basis of our lives, really. And
did you have any siblings growing up?
yeah, I had a brother, and he was in the Korean War. They turned him down in World War II because they said he had a heart flutter. And then he got a job, had a good job, and all of a sudden he got called up in the Korean War, spent 2 years in Korea, just like I did out in the Pacific, and never came home, although they did get R&R. They went to, he said they went, I think, 2 or 3 times to Japan, went over to Tokyo and got to see real people, for change and things like that.
And were you and your brother close growing up?
No. We were just that far apart that we were not close. I guess we were closer after we were adults, but since we lived in New York for 20 years, and he never left Iowa, but he was a railway mail clerk. You probably never heard of him, but they used to haul all the mail by rail when the trains were a big deal, and he would haul mail from Chicago to Omaha and back and forth. So he lived about, it's probably about halfway between where they lived, but he never left his hometown. And in fact, his wife still lives there.
And how much younger was he than you?
3 years, I think. Yeah, 3 years younger. And he was a golfer. He made the all southwest or southeast Iowa. He was honored as some kind of a, he was good enough so he was honored. But he was a very good golfer. He played with a lot of pros as an amateur and things like that around southeastern Iowa.
Now, did you have any jobs early on to help out with the family at all?
Yeah, I had a job in a grocery store. Every Saturday I delivered groceries in an old Model A Ford truck, and I got $1 a day. And that was a big deal because it carried me through. Or at that time, we could get into a Saturday afternoon, if we weren't working, movie for a nickel. And that was, the kids all went to those, and they were set up for that.
And how old were you at that time?
Well, I had just learned to drive, or my dad took me down to the river and taught me how to drive the day before I got my job. So I was 14, I believe. And at that time, we had no one had driver's licenses. And, you learned to drive. But, the farm kids, they started driving at 6 and 7. They drove tractors, and eventually into cars, and drove into cars. And that was just our way of life. That's what we did. And then after No, it was before. I worked on a couple of farms doing various things, digging weeds and stuff like that. It wasn't very much fun. I hated it. But it was, I think we got $1 a day then too. I'm not sure.
Now, do you remember some of your close friends growing up?
Yes, yeah, I remember. In fact, I was able to keep in touch. One of my class friends, one of the girls that actually I used to walk with her to school, and I never, when I was just maybe fourth or fifth grade, maybe third grade, she was afraid of dogs. This was related to me by her mother, and she'd come down about a half a block to my house, and then I'd walk with her to school because there was a dog down at the corner of our block, and she was afraid of it, and I didn't realize that. But the guys that I played basketball with, the one, he was in the Army down in Samoa, as a matter of fact. And I was surprised because he was a very, very bright guy. He had started to college like I did the first semester after we got out of high school. And he lost his wife, and I heard about it through one of my classmates. And we wrote emails for about 2 years, and then finally what did Al Nichols have, Barb? What did Al Nichols? What did he have? Did he?
Mean sickness?
Yeah.
Parkinson's.
Yeah, Parkinson's, and he went downhill very fast and passed away quite a few years ago. But he, we had reunions, class reunions about every 10 years, and I was able to go to them occasionally. But those were he was about the only one that I really kept up with, except the people at the reunions. And my old girlfriends, I kept up with them. And I haven't heard from anyone. I think I may be one of the last 4 or 5. Our class, we had about 50 kids, and I think I'm probably one of the last 4 or 5 that's still kicking.
Now, do you remember when the attack of Pearl Harbor occurred, where you were? And
yep, I was sitting in my parents' living room reading, and it came over the radio that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And at that time, I had just gotten home from college. I'd had a scholarship, sports scholarship, to a small college, co-college in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I had just gotten home at the end of the semester. And about a week later, a friend of mine that I'd played basketball against, we had fought against each other in basketball and football from another little town, called up and wanted to know if I wanted to go and work on a war plant in Hartford, Connecticut. And I like to move. I don't like stationary. And so I asked my folks if I could go, and they said, that's another mouth they didn't have to feed. They said, sure. And my mother liked to travel, so she was sort of a vagabond herself, and it was an experience. So that's where I got my noticed that I was drafted, and I don't like to march or walk, and I don't like to wear ties. So the Navy was the only thing. So I hightailed it from Hartford, Connecticut, back to Iowa, and enlisted in Iowa. And that was the reason I didn't go in the Army. I just detested marching and walking. I still do. I hate to walk.
And where did you go for basic training?
Great Lakes in north of Chicago, and it was pretty cold. It was in the winter, and around Great Lakes can get pretty cold, I'll tell you. And we had to go out and stand 4 hours as security, actually. And we'd stand out there next to the planes and freeze to death and fall half asleep. And it was a miserable experience, really.
Any positive memories?
From the Great Lakes? No, not one, because I was captain of the head, and that meant that I had to watch or get some guys to clean the toilets and the latrines and so forth. So no, I didn't have any positive memories of that at all.
And where did you go after your basic training?
We went down to Memphis to the Aviation Ordnance School, a little town outside of Memphis, maybe 15 minutes outside of Memphis. And we stayed there, I believe, 3 months. And then we're shipped to, I think it's Treasure Island, up in San Francisco area, anyway. And we stayed there until we were shipped overseas. And when I was shipped overseas, we went over in an ice cream ship, if you can believe that. The whole ship was full of ice cream counters and containers. And I guess, I probably shouldn't say this, but I guess maybe the officers must have gotten ice cream, because I was out there 2 years and I never saw ice cream once. And the whole ship, I mean, it was about twice as big as this house. You know, it was a very small ship. And we had to serve up in the crow's nest every night, 4 hours. We'd have 4 hours on, 8 hours off, and stand up. We stood. There were no seats there, and we were looking for submarines, Japanese submarines, and we never saw one. But we were in I think they call it a flotilla. There were probably 8 or 10 ships, larger, like battleships and cruisers. That's how. I didn't know much about the Navy as such. The boat Navy, I should call them, and but we did. It took us a long time to get out to the island. We landed at Espiritu Santos, Noumea. I think the name of the island actually was Noumea, but there was formerly a little city, evidently, and Espiritu Santos. It may still be there. I don't know.
Now, do you remember having a conversation with your parents after you were drafted and decided to enlist in the Navy? Did you guys talk about you going off to war at all?
Not really. That was sort of a hectic time, and a lot of my friends had already gone into the service, been drafted, because I was the youngest one in my class. So In fact, when I went to Hartford, I didn't get to work in a war plant for about 3 months because I was too young. And then you had to be 18. And had I known about it earlier, I would have lied about my age, but I didn't know about it, so I couldn't do that. I worked for the government in the draft office, typing resumes of guys that came in. We had we'd have busloads of people coming in, and we'd type up all of their information like you're doing now. And it was interesting but boring. Excuse me.
Did you have any reservations about going off to war?
Not really. It sounded sort of exciting. Once I got in, I wondered what I was crazy enough to do that for. But everybody my age, except a few farmers who were exempt, they wanted to keep if they had. They were the only farmer in the family, and they and their father, for instance, they were exempt if they wanted to be exempt. Not all of them were. My best friend went into the Marines, but he had several brothers and sisters, so it wasn't a hardship. It was considered a hardship if only the father, I think, and one son. But if there were other people in the family, then they didn't consider it that.
And had you ever been out on the ocean before?
No, had never seen it. Not only not been there, I had never seen it. And when we came out here to San Francisco, as we went out in the ship, it was scary. We were kids, and those but you got over it in a hurry. And that was there was nothing. Coming back, I'll tell you, it was pretty good, pretty nice to see that Golden Gate Bridge.
I could imagine.
Oh yeah, and to see, we never saw a white girl for 2 years. And, we were in small towns, you're social, you're dating girls and having parties and stuff like that all the time. And it was what I'd call a cultural shock. In those 2 years of not seeing, there were a lot of native girls. And actually when they were building the airstrips, the native girls would come over and do all the hard work, and then they'd ship them back to a little island where they lived every night. They wouldn't leave them there because they were afraid of fraternization. And but that was only at Guadalcanal. The other places, the Seabees did all the heavy work, and the Seabees, they were the heroes in my estimation of what I saw.
Tell me why.
What?
Tell me why.
They came in right after the Marines. The Marines would come in and secure a beach and move the troops, their troops back and drive the Japanese back. And then practically the next day, the Seabees would come in and start building airstrips. And they would have to hide behind, how a blade is on a big bulldozer? They'd have to hide behind, they'd get shot at and have to hide behind the bulldozer blades as they were, they'd be running the bulldozer and they'd start shooting at them, the Japanese start, so they had to hide down. And, I just can't imagine. It's just so scary. Although the Seabees were, I'd say, an average age of at least 10 years older than all of our ordinary troops. They were older guys. They had the experience, and they also had the best food. So during the time that we were near them, we would try to sneak into their chow lines once in a while because they had real meat, and they had real food. Well, except for milk, everybody had powdered milk. There wasn't any. But you'd try to sneak in there, and finally they used some kind of identification, and we couldn't get a hold of the IDs. But that's one of the little things that happened that were completely. As far as I was concerned, like I said, the Seabees and the Marines. The Marines were they took the big brunt of the shot, like in the European theater. The Army guys, and the LSTs and so forth had to. I couldn't imagine that either. It's just. How scary that must have been for all those, and like 95% of them were kids just like myself, 18, 19, 20. But that was a good thing about it, because you're so dumb you don't know you don't know enough to be scared until it actually happens.
Now, once you had left the U.S., tell me where you went first.
To Noumea, which is I'd say it's probably, well, you could always look it up, a couple of 100 miles north of Australia. And it was in the Solomon Island chain. And the Solomon Islands consisted of Noumea and Guadalcanal and New Georgia. We called it Munda, but it was actually New Georgia and Bougainville. And that was, I learned later, we didn't know that, but that was the beginning of the end of the Japanese Army, so to speak, and Navy. Because we won that section, and we were in the middle of it, and we island hopped every 6-7 months and jumped all, and our planes were hitting. There was another island in the Solomons called Truk, Truk, and that's where we started bombing, and then I think they were bombing from our area. We were sending planes to Saipan and other islands that I didn't know then and I don't know now.
So how long were you there before you moved on to Guadalcanal?
I don't really remember. It wasn't very long, maybe a week. It was a staging area. So people were sent from that place, from Esparito Santos. It seemed to be a big staging area for the Army and the Marines and Navy. And then we were there, like I say, probably 2 or 3 weeks. It wasn't very long. Went to Guadalcanal, and as I said before, we were at Guadalcanal, Henderson Field, for about 6 or 7, maybe 8 months. And then we jumped. We'd be at New Georgia 8 months, and Bougainville 8 months, and finally got rotated home. If you had to have so many points to be rotated home, and the older guys, there were a lot of factors involved. If you had children, and some of the Seabees had children, and that was counted into the points. Otherwise, you just got so many points for being in so many months. And
so I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of your stops, and kind of get a bit more in detail of your experiences at
Okay.
each one. So we'll start with
well, Guadalcanal would be the first, and we had aircraft that we took care of completely as far as bombs. There were bomb racks under the bellies of planes, and they were about that long, and they had hooks on each end, and you hooked the bombs on those, and then we had machine guns in each wing. And in the early days, for the first 3 or 4 months, we had SBDs, which were low-level bombers. And in those planes, there was a seat in the rear for an aerial gunner. And I tried out to be an aerial. I'm stupid as you can be as an aerial gunner, and I didn't know about it, but I flunked out because of my eyes. And it was when we were in college was the first time I really realized. She told me that we couldn't sit in the front row in the theater because that's where I could see, but she didn't care for it very much. But anyway, that was part of the deal, and the aerial gunner sat in back. What am I doing?
You're okay.
Screwing up your cable there?
Nope, you're all right.
But so we loaded 30 caliber. They had twin 30 caliber machine guns, and the guys sat in a pivoting seat, and they rolled around like that with they had, I shouldn't say that, they had a little armor plate along the sides of their body, and they it was a very vulnerable situation. You know, and in some of them, they told me, I never really saw them, but they said that they had a stick to run the airplane in case the pilot got killed, and they were supposed to bring the plane in. But I'm not sure that lasted very long. I think that disappeared because I didn't really see it, but I heard that that's happened, and that's what we did. We day and night we loaded bombs on the aircraft and loaded machine guns with ammunition when the planes would come back in, and then they'd go out, and the pilots worked, as far as I know, they worked, on much the same schedule. We'd work 8 hours on and 4 hours off over most of my experience, not all of it, but and that's all we did. And we got really bored at times because there wasn't anything to do. And on some islands, I think it was New Georgia, we started getting athletic equipment like softballs, and bats and stuff, and they got softball teams organized, and in some places they had basketball courts that they built. The Seabees built those, and I don't know how all that came about. If you weren't an officer, you didn't know what the heck was going on. really. And you didn't really care. You just looked forward to going home, and 6 months stretched into 12 months and 12 months, and it was, I can remember that part about it. I think I missed 2 Christmases, and that's pretty hard on the kids, I think. And I don't remember too much other than that. But each island had its own identification, really. You did different things on my second trip. Then the next island in Noumea, I think they made a mistake because we came in very shortly after the Marines did. We had no airstrip. So I think somebody screwed up and sent us too early. And there were land crabs. They had a land crab migration. The land crabs are about that big around, totally, and all red. And they, by the millions, would move from, I learned later, they moved from one side of the island to the other. And they got on the roads that were built and smell. Oh, they stunk to high heaven. It was just, I can remember, I can still smell them. It's been 70 years, but I can still smell them. And that was the big deal there, where our airstrip was down right on the beach, right at the beach. And we were not supposed to go swimming. And malaria was a big deal then. Both at Guadalcanal, not so much, but once we moved to New Georgia, Munda, malaria became pretty prevalent. And we weren't supposed to swim because we got jungle rot, what they call jungle rot. After a while, we learned it was coral poisoning. If you got scratched and got coral in, I had holes in my legs, at least on each leg I had maybe 2 or 3 holes in my legs about that big around, and it went all the way to the bone. That's pretty scary too for a kid. But it didn't bother us that much at the time. It scared us after we had it. And that was one of the first, they told us, one of the first usages of sulfa drugs. They took sulfa powder and just dumped it in the hole and said, go back to work. It was one of those things. And then malaria was the same thing. You got 2 hours off if you had malaria. And temperatures rose to, I remember 105, 106, and they may have been a little more than that in some kids' places.
And pretty humid too, I would imagine.
I don't remember that at all. But we lived in tents. Generally about 4 people to a tent, and the tents were about the size, most of them the size of this part of this room. And we had mosquito netting over our cots. And those, I can't, some of the things. Oh, one thing about it was that we had our foxholes. We dug foxholes, and they were actually little rooms. We'd build a bench, dig a bench out of dirt, and then when we got the foxhole all done, then we would cover them with what?
I was going to remind you, when you were swimming, who came?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, but who came when you were in the
Oh, yeah, that's right. But to carry this first about the malaria and the jungle rot, and eventually, after I guess we were married about 10 years, and the holes, my legs started disappearing. You know, they were there. You know, and I don't know that.
But when you were in the water, didn't Mrs. FDR come? When you
Oh
were
yeah,
swimming?
yeah. That's what I was going to tell him. Yeah, when we were at Guadalcanal, we were all swimming naked in the river, and the reason we were in there was we'd get a guy upstream, and he'd throw a grenade in the water, and it would blow the fish out, and that would be the only fresh food we had, and we'd stand down, and then the rest of the guys would stand down holding a volleyball net and catch the fish fresh, and we'd take them in, and the guys, the cooks would cook them up for us. But the time that I'm referring to that we were in there, Eleanor Roosevelt came in to see what was going on. She had to stick her big nose in, and she was going to survey what was going on. And they wasted 40, I can remember it just as much as was today. She had 40 fighter planes come in, and she was, at that time, DC-3 was the big transportation deal. And she came in, and for some reason or other, I don't know how she could see us, but she saw us in the river, and the guys running along the banks, and everybody was naked because we didn't have swimming suits, you know. And she wanted to put us on report. She recommended to the skipper. Well, the skipper of the island was a pretty savvy guy, a pretty nice guy, and he agreed with her. And then as soon as they left, they expunged the record, so that we never got it put on our record. And that's what I mean by that one medal that we were supposed to get, good conduct medal. That was sort of sort of flaky, really. But it was an interesting interlude. Let's put it that way.
Now, did you make any close friends during your time in the service?
We were all pretty close at the time that we were together. But I remember, like a guy, one of the guys, and I've got his picture here, V.J. Jones, and his dad was a automobile dealer in International Falls, Minnesota. I remember that. And there were two kids. These guys were on my crew. I had a crew of about 5 or 6 guys. And one kid was only 14 years old. He lied about his age, and he wasn't very big. I don't know why but he came from someplace in West Virginia, and he went in and lied about his age, and he was, by the time I got him, I think he was about 15. And then there was a kid from Florida, Miami, Florida, Wilbur Dreggers. And he was only he's just barely 5 feet tall. A nice little kid, but didn't know come here from Sikkim, as we used to say in Iowa. But, they were nice kids. The 2 kids from California, Jones, Wilbur Dreggers. Yeah, I had about 6. Oh, and one kid from... what's the cowboy all in Kansas? Dodge City. He was from Dodge City, and a great artist. He was just, he could sit down and he drew like for comic strips and stuff like that. And in our one of our books that we got at one time or another, he had done cartoons on every page, and I didn't know it actually until I got out of service that he was that good. But then I heard, and we taught him how to smoke. He didn't know how to smoke, so and everybody smoked at that time. We used to get 100 cigarettes in little what they call peanut cans. They're about like that, about that big around, and they used to pack 100 cigarettes in them, and we got them for $0.10.
For all 100?
Yeah, and everybody smoked, but he didn't smoke, so we taught him how to smoke, which was what a dumb thing to do, but that maybe that's where I got my good conduct medal. I helped him to smoke. Well,
as you guys, you're doing your job loading the bombs and the ammo for the machine guns, would you guys actually see the pilots off, or would this happen?
Oh no, we had on the airstrips they had what they call revetments, which were just build up. They were build up mounds of dirt, and they were wide enough for a fighter plane to get in, and the pilots would come in, and as I recall, they used to get out of their planes, and then I believe they were pushed. I think the mechanics aircraft mechanics would push the planes back into the revetment. So when the Japanese bombed, they wouldn't be able to flash from one place to another, so to speak. And then that's where we'd work on. We had, electricians, and we had mechanics, and we had ordnancemen. I think that was all. And pretty much each area had these same guys. So we worked at different times, because I don't recall, maybe occasionally a mechanic would be there when we were, but they were a little afraid to be there when we were, because we were loading bombs, and if you loaded a live bomb, 100-pound bombs were about that long, and they had a fuse in the front and a little tail gizmo on the back, and it was pretty much on every island, pretty much that way, where they used that kind of a situation. But
so would you ever have any interaction with the pilots, or?
No, except when they yelled at us. When they came back in and their machine guns wouldn't work, that was the interaction. Otherwise, all of these places, they had what they called officers' country, and enlisted men weren't allowed there. And I think that's because they got ice cream. But anyway, that was the routine, and the only thing that I recall that my own he was the officer in charge of our division, and he was a nice kid. He just graduated from Dartmouth. I remember that, and he was a nice young guy. But we came to one setup where I'm not sure where, it was either Munda or Bougainville, but the officers all had wooden platforms under their tents, and the platforms were like from here to the wall, and they were folded. So we had to go, somebody sent us over through officers' country for something or other, and we had dirt We didn't have wood platform. So we saw this, and we escaped with one set for our tent. He came in the next morning, and he said, "Can you imagine?" He said, "We're the only officers, he and his friends, that didn't have a wood platform in their tent." It just so happened that we'd escaped with his platform, and that was a funny thing. And he never did find out. We asked him a couple of days later if he had gotten flooring, and he said, "Yeah." He said, "We went down and appropriated somebody's platform." So they went down and stole somebody else's. I know.
Paid it forward.
Yeah, but that was one of the things that there were some humorous things that happened, but so much of the time when you were not working, it was so boring. We had no, except for probably the newspaper that they used to write. We'd get a hold of one of those once in a while, and maybe someone's parents would send a magazine out. It'd be 3 or 4 months late, and Christmas, we always, in the 2 Christmases, we didn't get anything until February. Our stuff never arrived, Christmas presents, and the mothers would send along candy and cookies and stuff like that, but most of them, by the time they got to us, in that kind of a climate, they were not very good.
Now, were there any instances where you found yourself under attack? You mentioned the Japanese would come and do bombing runs, but
we just headed for the foxholes, except when we were down on the airstrip, and that was a little scary. So we just actually laid against the. They did most of their bombing at night, but on Bougainville, it was a whole different deal. They had actually strapped the Japanese guys, I suppose in their mind, they volunteered, and they strapped them in trees with automatic rifles. The first automatic rifles that I had heard of, or machine guns, I'm not sure which. And they would be in the jungle near the airstrip, and then they were supposed to shoot at the aircraft when they came back in to blow them up. But like I say, it may have happened on other islands, but Bougainville was where we ran into it. And we had, the best thing to do was to get somebody to cut down one of the big trees and then tunnel under it and use it as a foxhole. And the trees were, humongous. They were as big around as I could reach, and larger, actually. But I don't. We at Bougainville, the Japanese pushed the army back. Bougainville was on a mountain, actually, and we were on one side, and the Japanese that hadn't left, it was fairly early in the war, and they hadn't left on the other side. So the Japanese started on a push back, and we knew it was coming, and we had to set up machine gun positions all the way around the airstrip, and that's the scaredest we got. And then they called the Marines. I think it was I heard it was the 3rd Marine Division, but I'm not sure that it was that. But anyway, they came back in and pushed the Japanese back. Evidently, they'd driven a hole in the Army, where the Army was, and gotten through that hole. I guess that's how it worked. We had a lot of gossip about things, that we were really never sure about, and actually, we really never cared, except in that situation where they were going to come right down on us, and it was either them or us. But luckily, they had the Marines come in, and we didn't have to use the machine guns. On the ground, you use water-filled or water-oriented machine guns, and I can't tell you what that meant at all, but that's what they told us. And our planes were all electronic or electric. Our airplanes and our guns were all hooked up so that when the pilots had a stick with a trigger on it, and it would work electronically into the machine guns. But I don't know. I had made a few notes here, and I'll give this to you if you want it, so you can see that I'm not pushing too hard here. Oh yeah. We were supposed to get. We had worked all night. And Monday is where it was. We had worked all night for, I can't tell you how many days, but it was a long number of days, day and night belting ammunition, because they'd gotten the poor belts in. So we had to belt our own for all of our planes. And we were supposed to get a presidential citation at 2 different times, and we never got it. It wasn't on our record. It was never sent in, and the guys were pretty upset about that, because we worked 4 on, 8 off, 4 on, 8 on. Doesn't make any difference if it was midnight or whether it was 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And my little kids, the 2 kids, the young kids, 14 and 15 years old, it just worked them to a frazzle. They just could not. We had a hard enough time, the older guys, but these 2 little kids, it was pretty tough on them. And I often wondered how when they got their discharge, what, like that seat that you have there, that discharge seat, often wondered what it had on it. Whether they admitted their age or whether anybody cared. When I came back, and another funny little story, when I came back aboard ship, nowadays they're meeting them with big bands and all this stuff. We had 4 people when the ship docked up in Treasure Island or San Francisco, wherever we docked. I remember I looked down, and here's about 200 kids on the deck and several below deck, and they sent us right to a discharge center. And I had a beautiful Navy hospital blanket that I had procured, and then somebody had gotten a bunch of a whole box of German Lugers. They had floated up on the beach, and they'd gotten them, and I had gotten one of those German Lugers, and I had put it in my sea bag when I came back. And that and 4 pair of shoes. My dad worked on the railroad, and he'd wear out shoes pretty fast. So I was always getting him shoes. So they took, as we went through this detention center, I'd call it, and these guys took my blanket and my gun, and I know that they stole them and took them home that night. But that irritated me too when we got out that way. But
Now, rewinding a little bit, as you guys are hopping from one island to the next, did you get a sense that you were winning the war, that you were headed in the right direction?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think, and I think we were sort of told that, and there was a lady that broadcast propaganda. Have you ever watched MASH?
Oh, yeah.
Well, where they broadcast propaganda that their wives were running around with somebody else and all that kind of stuff. Well, we got that. I can't remember the lady's name.
Is it Tokyo Rose?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Tokyo Rose. And they finally got her, too, after the war. They got her and put her in prison. But anyway, that was a lot of the news that we got was through that radio channel. And maybe we had another radio station of our own. I don't know. We didn't have a radio, so again, it was in officers' country. They had radios, I guess, and stuff. But I have a little prejudice about the officers. I got thrown in the brig in Alameda or in Oakland. That was when we were in Alameda. When we came home, we used Oakland as our recreation area to the bars and so forth. And I didn't salute an officer one night, and there was a SP right behind me, grabbed me and threw me in the drunk tank. And we had to stay in there. We had a little boat that went from Oakland to Alameda over this little river or whatever it was. And the last boat left at 12 o'clock. So they'd let you out at 15 minutes after 12 out of the drunk tank. So you had to go down there and sleep on the benches, the waiting benches, until 6 o'clock in the morning. And I just did that once. It never happened again.
Now, did you ever get homesick while you were overseas?
I think so. I think more, and I think all the guys did around Christmas. That's when I'd say that's when the most homesick occurred. But other than that, I don't know. You were either too busy or too bored, I guess, to think about it much. But I don't. That's been a long time ago, and I don't really remember getting that homesick, really. We got our Dear John letters, and we lost our girlfriends, almost all of us, if we had girlfriends. And you'd get a letter and say, you've been gone 9 months, or you've been gone a year, or whatever, and goodbye.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
Yeah.
Did you get one of those letters?
Yep, sure did.
How did that make you feel?
I don't know now. I can't remember. I think I was disgusted, probably, and but I could see, I could see it happening. It wasn't. I don't think it was that really big a deal because everybody in my tent, everybody in my crew got them at one time or another. It was just sort of expected after being out there that long, and you couldn't expect people to wait for you.
Now, when you left the United States, did you have an idea of how long you'd be gone for? Did you think you'd be gone for?
We signed up for a year. When I signed up in the Navy, I signed up for 1 year. And we had no idea that we'd be in the Navy that long, and we had no idea that we'd be, that we'd be anywhere close to almost 4. I think I was in 42 months, I think, or 44. I can't remember exactly, but.
Now, how would you say that your time in the service and serving in the Navy, how did that shape you as a man and a young man turning into a man?
I think we grew up as people, and I think we actually when we got home we were pretty cocky. We thought we'd been there and we thought we knew everything. And it's like college kids. When they've had about 2 years of college, they think they know everything there is to know about everything. And I think we were that way with the Navy. But other than that, I don't recall any. But that, too, that's been a long time ago, and your thoughts differ, I think, through the years.
Now, do you remember when you found out that the war had ended in Europe?
Oh,
did you know?
Yeah, that I should have mentioned that the night that we heard that. Our officers brought down a bottle of whiskey, and we hadn't drunk any whiskey. Anyway, it didn't take long to have gotten pretty high, I guess. And some of the guys, I'm not saying I did, but some of the guys went down and got into the backs of the aircraft. And we had these towers were about as high as this house, and they were built. I say the base was probably as wide as this room, and they got in the planes with the machine guns and shot the towers down. And they were looking for people for a long time after that, after VE Day, and. I can't say that a lot of people that got good conduct medals should have had them after that deal or not, but it was funny. And then another thing that happened, we had some officers. Well, they were the one guy that was a warrant officer, and a warrant officer is not really an enlisted man. He's not really an officer. It's a rank or rating between them, and they weren't very well liked by either end, listed or officers. So one of the guys, he was with the Marines, he had a Jeep, and he was pretty cocky about having a Jeep because, so somebody, the Marine Jeeps were all painted green and shades of green, and the Navy were all shades of blue. So somebody took the Jeep, they got it when he was sleeping, took it out in the jungle, repainted it, and put it up in where all the other Jeeps were and he never found his Jeep. And it was a story that went around. I don't know who was involved, but I had heard about it, and I thought it was a funny story. But things like that. I guess that's what we did to, break up the time, break up the boredom. Probably some of the things we weren't supposed to do, but. Oh, and one story, it had nothing to do with me, but we had a skipper on one of the islands that was an alcoholic. And there were what they call lister bags. And they were about that big around and about that deep. And there was supposed to be water in them. Well, this guy knew enough about making beverages, so he took. They take alcohol out of the torpedoes, and some way or another sift it through so it wasn't poisonous, and they put that into these lister bags with big gallon cans of peaches. And they'd let that ferment for about a week, and then they drank that, and they were going to load his lister bag with water one day, and it was all full, and so they'd start checking on it, and that's what it was. It was all fermented juices and whiskey, and then of course when guys found that out. Then they did it. Some of the older guys,
started tapping into it.
Yeah, just copied it. But it was, a story like that. We thought was sort of funny and
very, very resourceful.
Yeah.
Now tell me about when you found out the war was over in the Pacific, and you realized you were able to eventually go back home.
I don't. The only thing I can remember, we had two guys who had children that had just been. I think they'd just been drafted. That was at the time that they started drafting in the Navy, the last year, and. Or start drafting, and I guess you could join the Navy or the Coast Guard or the Marines or Army, whatever you wanted. And we had a couple of guys that had children, and everybody, younger guys that knew him felt sorry for him. And the rotation deal was, you got so many points for being overseas for every month. Every month you were overseas, you got so many points. If you were married and had children, you got so many points. And that's the biggest thing I recall, that these two guys, especially the one, got rotated out right away so he could go home and see his family. But, you were excited about going home, but then too, you wondered what you were going to do when you got there. And they had the government had a deal where it was called a 5220. And if you couldn't find a job that related to the skills that you had before you went in the service, you got $20 a month, which was, we were still at the end of the Depression, and you got $20 every month. And as it turned out, my dad's put up with it for about a month and a half, and he found me a job. He said, I don't want you here anymore. And he sent me down to my uncle's house. I lived there, and a guy that I worked for picked me up, and I worked on the railroad. I was just about, I think, a month too late to get into college for that second semester. I think I got out in February and the new semester started in January. So I was going to lay around and do nothing, and my dad said, I don't think so.
He had other plans.
Yeah. And at that time, we were drinking pretty heavily, and that didn't go over with my parents at all because they didn't drink. And I still had I was at Alameda. When I came back from overseas, I was at Alameda about 4 or 5 months, I guess, which was very boring. We just actually we sat around and played pinochle all day, every day. It was, we'd go out for an hour, take the new recruits out and show them how to load bombs, how to load machine guns, how to take the machine guns out of the wings and repair them and that kind of stuff. But that was only a couple hours a day, and it was pretty boring for 4 or 5 months.
Now, when did you meet your wife?
In college, blind date.
Who set you up?
I don't know. I guess a good friend of hers recommended to her that she called me. I guess she called me.
I think she set it up.
Yeah, and we had a date, and we went. And I don't dance. I hate to dance, and she loves to dance. So the first date we had, we went to a dance, and I don't know what we did at the dance, but I don't recall that very much. I don't think we danced. And we had very strict rules at that college. We had, it was about as straight-laced as any place you'd ever see. We would have to come up to the dormitories, all the people, everybody was out there with their girlfriends, and when they do, ring a bell or some damn thing, and the girls had to go into the dormitories. I mean, it was like a prisoner of war camp, and
We're outside the door saying goodbye to your boyfriend, right? And it became 10 o'clock. The house mother opened the door and pulled you inside. I mean, you knew better. You had to get in there.
And they couldn't smoke in the dorms.
No.
So they always had to, and all the girls smoked, so they had to pilfer their way in and smoke, and the same way with alcohol. I think they had to get it one way or another.
They didn't make it easy for you.
No, but when we tell kids that are going to college now, they absolutely are, our grandchildren absolutely can't associate with that kind of attitude at all.
Tell them about your roommate, Kenny.
Oh yeah, I had a Japanese roommate, Kenny Kobakata, and he had been in the Army over in Italy, and and I think he went in a little while in Germany. He had 11 Purple Hearts. He said every time I got to moving around in the foxholes, he said somebody would shoot, then I'd get shrapnel or something. He had marks all over. He only stood about that tall, and I said, "Why didn't you duck?" But he had 11 Purple Hearts. It just amazed me. And then people ask me how I could, fight against the Japanese and then have a Japanese roommate. But it was just a natural occurrence. It just happened, And he was the nicest guy. I got bombed one night, and we had a date, and he was, I don't know where he was, or she called him to get back over to a dorm because my dorm was clear across campus, and they were afraid I wouldn't make it. And a train track ran through campus, and they were afraid the train would hit me or something. So,
he fought on the U.S. side, with the U.S. Army. Your roommate?
Yes, right. Yeah, U.S. Army. Yeah, he was in one of those Nisi divisions. Have you ever heard of them? They're division. They were divisions in World War II, and they're called Nisi. N-I-E-I-S-I, I believe was how. And they were all Japanese, and almost. Kenny said they're almost 100% from California, and they sent them. The kids, they could volunteer. And his parents were at Santa Anita, at that big Japanese internment camp down at Santa Anita, and they gave the kids the option of joining the Army, and they all went to, like Kenny went to Italy, and I think some of them were in southern France and that kind of thing.
Do you still keep in contact with him?
I did until he died. Until I think he died. We get from the college. We get a
newsletter.
Sort of a newsletter magazine, and it has the people who passed away, and it tells you the people who have donated, and he always did. So I was pretty sure that when I stopped seeing his name that he'd passed away, but I'm not sure. I don't know. But we kept in contact for many, many years, and actually we stopped in. He was from Chicago, and he was the head of the audiovisual division for a television station in education, an educational audiovisual operation there. And we stopped to see him in later years. I don't know how old we were, but we'd been retired for many years. And that's the last I actually saw him in person.
Now, tell me, how long did you and your wife date before you got married?
Oh, a year and a half.
Something like that, yeah.
I'd say roughly a year and a half. We actually worked together in a student union, and got to know. I think we got to know each other probably best there because, waiting on people. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, why. Some people can be obnoxious, and especially in deals like that where they think they might be a little better than you because you're working. It's sort of a snob appeal type thing. But that's where we met, and then we were married in her hometown in New York. And a lot of, actually, the Japanese boy was at our wedding party.
And how long have you guys been married for?
68 years.
And how many children do you guys have?
5. And 4 of them are out here, and one girl is still with her daughter in Florida. And we came out here because they thought we should be closer to them in case something happened, like that. And
So they thought they could take care of us then if we needed, well, like now we don't drive, and which is great because Sue, doctor appointments and,
that's a pretty big break in your life when you have to stop driving. Believe me,
terrible.
because I commuted every day for 20 years, an hour each way. So I did a lot of driving with a lot of different kind of cars, and it's a comeuppance when that happens. But I don't actually miss it. When we ride around, I can see I wouldn't want to drive out here.
It's no fun.
No, not fun. No, and it used to be fun. And in Florida, we lived in a sort of it was a retirement community.
55 and over.
Yeah, all houses, and it was about 4 miles into town, and you go straight in, on a 2-lane road. Well, actually, it was 4-lane in parts of it, but and you you turned left. There the stores were. It wasn't like this. You have to move all over and run all over the countryside, and but that's how it evolved.
Now, do you guys have any advice on?
Laugh. Keep a sense of humor. Really.
Yep, a sense of humor.
Yep.
And for older people, after they retired, get a hobby.
Most of this stuff in this room, either I've painted or he's built.
Yeah, so those are all her paintings. And
sometimes we'll wake up in the morning. Oh, I have an idea what I want to do. We never sit here. Oh, what am I going to do today? Never.
And I'm a stamp collector.
Also.
So I collect my whole den in there. You can look in when you go. It's just full of stamp things, and I even have pictures of 4 or 5 kids that I had played football for me in the 50s and 60s. And they, I have great memories of my coaching career. And
when his kids will email or on Facebook, they just had their 70th birthday, and it blows his mind.
They were.
Feels, well, I'm 70. They must still be 30.
They were 16 and 17 when I knew them. And one kid just the other day wanted to know if it was me that she was. It was our emails under her name, and he wrote a little note about how he remembered me, or how he didn't remember me too well, or whatever. And I say, I have a whole book. I don't know where it is. Where's that book? My 90th birthday, and
You mean that one with the pictures in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And it has notes in the back and emails from people I had. I had one kid who was an All-American track man at Purdue, and he'd been an All-American track man in high school. And another kid who was an All-American at Princeton, football player. And, things like that they wrote, when I had my 90th birthday, they wrote notes.
Pick the book up and show them. We've got
Yeah, in the back part, I think there's.
In the front, we've got pictures of him in his uniform and so forth.
Yeah, there's how I evolved.
Handsome man.
This is on Monday. New Georgia, and right outside was a little palm tree with the top blown off, and we had a little panda bear that showed up, and he sat up there for about 4 or 5 days, and then he took off. And the very next night, we had a rocket come in about 15 feet from our tent, and luckily it was a dud. And this is where that was taken. But I have there's some of the notes from the kids that I had that played football for me or were in track. I still get a Christmas card from this kid. He was the president of my homeroom when he was in 7th grade. And I still get Christmas cards from him.
That's great.
Yeah, our daughter Sue went through all our albums over here and old letters and everything and made this book for him and contacted a couple of the people.
And she did this, some of my, there's 3 brothers that played football for me. And the middle kid we called him Twinkle Toes. And when they wrote to me, when they found out that I was still alive, they wrote to me and they said that Twinkle Toes still remembered me. Things like that are great memories. These are all guys that played ball for me too.
It's a great legacy.
Oh yeah, it's just a thing that you don't expect, but you're proud of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you had an impact on so many people's lives.
Yeah, actually, I didn't realize it, but and one kid, the kid that I just showed you was in the 7th grade homeroom. He was told not to go that he wasn't college material, so he went in the Army. And then he wrote to me or something and wanted to know if I thought that he could get into college. And I said, absolutely, because it was a very top of the line high school that I worked in. And the kids, about 90% always went to college. And as a result, if they would go to New Jersey or Florida or Iowa, they'd zip through the first 2. What are you doing?
It's so dark. I wondered if he needed more light.
Oh yeah, but is that all right?
Yeah, it's totally fine.
Oh. So I told him, I said, you go to any college that you want to and enroll. And he did, and he graduated with honors. And he said, I'll never forget that. He said, the guidance counselors told me I wasn't college material. And, that kind of thing is.
Just needed somebody to believe in him.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. And I had 2 or 3 others said the same thing, that they'd been told that they weren't, they shouldn't go to college. And one of them is a lawyer. Yeah. So, things like that happen. Then I sent one kid out. I thought kids from the East sometimes don't associate themselves with living in the Midwest. And some kids, I think, that I knew right away would, evolve into the whole college picture in the Midwest. And he did. And I still hear from him, and he was an attorney for and the president of a large food company out there in the Midwest, in Minneapolis, one of the big food companies. And I'm pretty proud of that. I was able to talk, and he later said, I didn't expect to go to college. He said he came from parents who both of them worked, and he said it was the best thing that ever happened to me to go out there and be able to succeed. And
Zach, would you be able to, stay longer? You still have more stuff to do, because Sue said she would bring over something for all of us to eat. Would you be all right with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which actually leads me to the last question that I have for you for the interview is, how would you like to be remembered, and how would you like your legacy to live on?
to whom?
To your children, your grandchildren, and great
Oh,
grandchildren.
That I always had a lot of fun, and I don't know.
Okay.
I always admired
Okay.
what kids have done that I have known, that I've had contact with, and it's pretty hard to, because it's you touch a lot of lives that you have no idea what you might have done to help them succeed, both your family and others outside. And as a teacher, you hit an awful lot more lives, young life.
I have a question. Would you, like